Hello and welcome to Did Jesus Exist? Today we're going to be responding to a video where they bring up 5 new points that say that we should believe in a historical Jesus. But oddly enough, these are 5 points that I've never really heard before and honestly are about the weakest arguments that I've ever heard on the subject of Jesus. So, I hope that you enjoy this refutation. Please, if you will, keep it in mind to share this out to anybody that might be suggesting that Jesus was indeed a historical figure and they might be using these particular sources. So, let's dive right in.
To this day, there are still conflicted arguments as to whether or not the man known as Jesus Christ ever existed. There are situations where people are labeled as crazy for believing or sinners for not believing. But in today's It's All Viral video, we're going to be counting down the top 5 reasons to believe that Christ the Lord and Savior really does exist.
I can't wait. I really can't. I mean, I've already watched this, of course, to formulate responses and whatnot to it, but believe me, these are doozies. So hold on to your seats.
Starting at number 5, the biblical blankets that many believe to be the burial blanket of Jesus Christ himself show a strange image of a man's body. It's been worshipped by vast numbers and can be located in a cathedral in Turin. However, research and experimenting on the shroud were believed to have turned up a dating for the cloth, with it accurately dating back not only to the time of Christ, but the 14th century. Now in the present day, the Catholic Church does not specify whether or not the Shroud of Turin is authentic. However, many of the members of the church still identify it as a source of holiness.
Okay, before we get to number 4, we got to address this. Okay, the Shroud of Turin. I've actually got a video on this where I discussed why the Shroud of Turin isn't any kind of evidence for Jesus, and let alone whether or not it's authentic. I mean, even in the video there, he says that it both dates back to the time of Jesus, but also to the 14th century. How can it date back to both of those? I mean, what the fuck, right? So listen, the shroud actually dates back, I think the 14th century is correct. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong down below, but I think that it does date back to the 14th century, but it is indeed a forgery. There are a number of ways to debunk the Shroud of Turin. Number 1, all of the appendages and whatnot don't align with how anatomy works in human beings. And it's not just like how human beings work now. Of course, every human being is going to work the same as far as like how long their appendages grow and whatnot. If they're a normal human being, they don't have any kind of abnormalities, which, by saying that would be like dwarfism or whatever. The appendages, the measurements don't line up like how it should. That would be, I guess, among one of the weakest points of it, but also you can easily recreate it. I know a painter was able to recreate a Shroud of Turin, not exactly the way that it is. Of course, it's kind of like a thumbprint. The way each painting is, it's got its own little thumbprint kind of deal. The reproducibility of it to look exactly like it kind of throws some doubt in there. But the most solid piece of evidence against the Shroud of Turin would be the fact that the actual carbon dating on it doesn't date it back to the 1st century, dates it back to the 14th century. So that's no reason to believe that Jesus actually existed. No historical Jesus actually had to exist in order for this shroud to come into existence. So that's really poor evidence, which I'm guessing is why it's at number 5.
Moving on to number 4, the crown of thorns that was placed on Christ's head as a matter of mockery is today still identified as a key piece of evidence in the case of proving Christ's existence. One key piece of evidence is a near enough fully completed crown in the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The detail of this evidence shows that the crown dates back at least 16 centuries. Meaning, of course, it's a lot closer to the time of Christ when compared to the previously mentioned biblical blankets.
Okay, so if it dates back closer than the biblical blanket, right, which the biblical blanket, despite what he says, it dating to actual Jesus time, It only dates back to the 14th. So, with that particular crown, which I haven't actually researched that particular crown, but it also hasn't come up as a way to validate a Jesus existing. Now, if it was actually Jesus's thorn of crowns, then it would definitely have blood on it and whatnot. We would be able to test it, carbon date it, and whatnot. But you see, the problem is with a lot of these holy relics, they don't allow people to touch them. They don't allow people to carbon date them. They just say, "Oh yes, this is Jesus's crown. Just fucking believe us." And it's like, no, that's not how this works. So we test it and shit, carbon date and whatnot. So if it carbon dates earlier than the blanket, sure, but it doesn't actually date within the time frame of Jesus. Now, there are actually a lot of different, places that display a portion of the crown of thorns. So, I mean, when you have so many of these copies going around, I mean, how can you really ascribe this one to be the crown of thorns, or let alone without any kind of carbon dating done on it or any kind of scientific research done on it at all? How can you say that it actually dates back to Jesus' time? So, I'm going to have to call bullshit on number 4 here. This is insufficient evidence to establish an actual historical Jesus. Please try again.
At number 3, the Dead Sea Scrolls are another piece of key evidence towards the case for existence. Noted as one of the most important archaeological finds of the century, these documents date back to being written sometime between 150 BC and 70 AD, the exact period in time in which Christ lived. Translations of these scrolls refer to a teacher of righteousness, which many believe to be a reference to Christ himself.
Okay, so you're saying that because it dates back to around 70 AD to 150 AD, that is the time of Christ. That's not the time of Christ. The supposed time of Christ was between like 4 BCE and 33 AD. So you're being disingenuous on that part by saying that it dates back to the time of Christ. It dates back to the time of the apostle, or not the apostles, but the Gospels being written. It dates back to that time. It doesn't date back past, I believe it's Paul. So actually Paul is a bit more indicative of a Jesus existing, albeit Paul's Jesus never actually set foot on earth. He's completely imagined Jesus. He doesn't act like Paul doesn't ever reference Jesus to be an actual person here on earth. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a pretty big piece of evidence, but it's actually evidence against the authenticity of the Bible. Because, in the first century, you had this whole landscape of different types of Christianities, different beliefs going around. And basically what you had was one main thread of Christianity that was pretty much a Markian or Paul type of Christianity, and then there were some other main lines of Christianity, which the Pauline Christianity, I believe, became Orthodox or something. I'm not sure. In either case, like two types of Christianities kind of won out, and then they formed two separate kinds of churches. You got the Roman Catholics, and then you get the Orthodox Christians. So, For you to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that Jesus existed, no. I mean, you could use it to say, oh well, somebody was around to spread this stuff, but with the fact that there were so many Christian communities going around that had different versions of a Jesus, and even the earliest version of Jesus didn't even exist on Earth. The Dead Sea Scrolls evidence that you're saying here has to be a whole lot stronger in order to use it to say that you should believe in a historical Jesus, which it just isn't. It doesn't add enough to the probability that Jesus existed. It just simply doesn't. But it does, lend credence to this whole idea that there were a lot of different Christian communities that were around that didn't just spring up overnight. This shit took time to come into existence.
At number 2, we have the ossuary. In 2001, the discovery of a bone box of ancient descent with the words, "James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus," sent Christ believers into overdrive. However, in 2004, Israeli police arrested the collector from Tel Aviv with the understanding that he had forged this object. Once again, the pendulum swung to the other side last year when the case was dismissed due to the fact the main witnesses were found out to not have sufficient evidence to prove that the collector had forged the box.
Okay, so this ossuary, right? The only time in which the Jews would have buried their dead in this fashion was indeed between 20 BCE and 70 AD, which was the destruction of the temple. Whether or not this was, actually done, or this piece dates back to the first century isn't in question. It does date back to the first century. But the contention is the engraving on it. The very first part of the engraving, saying James, the son of Joseph, that's not necessarily in question. That's pretty authentic, but it's the brother of Jesus part that has come into question. And the Israeli Antiquities Authority has actually deemed it to be a modern forgery through various methods. There is some contention surrounding this, but in all likelihood, it does seem like the science puts the probability on it being a forgery. Maybe not a modern forgery, but the way that the engraving of Brother of Jesus is done would suggest that it was put on there at a later date, not suggesting that James, the son of Joseph, is actually the brother of Jesus. Now there is actually, that one reference in Josephus that says that, Jesus had a brother named James, but that's determined to be an interpolation carried out later on when somebody was copying books. So please try again.
And finally, at number 1, the one thing that most believers rely on to prove the existence of Christ himself is the Holy Bible itself.
Oh no, not the Bible itself. Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ.
Considered the sacred book of Christianity, the inputs of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are thought to have been written by 4 of the disciples of Christ himself in a time period after his death by crucifixion.
No, that's not. No, the authors of no. Just fucking no. Just fuck this shit. Fuck it all. Fuckity fuck.
The records of the Holy Bible contain a lot of overlap between the accounts of Christ's life and death, which further reinforce the idea that he did exist at some point in time in the past.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Like, it seems like you did no fucking research before even putting this video out. Okay, first of all, there was one gospel to begin with. That was Mark. And then guess what? Matthew and Luke, they both copied off of Mark. And then John is just way fucking out there, who pulled, his came after the other two, so the sentiments were already established. He just fucking threw in a whole bunch of Republican conservative shit and boom, created John, right? And so the 3 canonical gospels are, there's only one original and then 2 copies with a whole bunch. One of them's got magic sprinkled all the fuck over it, and then the other one is just got a little bit more change in it to make it more magical. And so I don't. God damn. What else do you gotta say?
And that's it, guys. Those are 5 pieces of evidence that the man known as the Christ did indeed walk the earth 2,000 years ago.
No, those actually aren't. I mean, those are about the 5 worst pieces of evidence that you could ever bring up. Like, seriously. And even if the ossuary, like the James, was indeed the brother of a Jesus, I mean, that comes back to the whole argument of, well, there was a lot of Jesuses going around at the time. And so you kind of fall into that little black hole of an argument. And that's not a good, that doesn't provide you with any kind of solid evidence. That's just throwing it up in the air and just being like, oh, fuck, I guess there was a Jesus. Holy shit. Now I guess we'll just go and have some fucking hot wings or some shit. So, you need to come up with better evidence. If you're watching this and you disagree with me, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear why you think these pieces pieces of evidence are solid, not just the biblical one. Because I know a lot of you people like to use the Bible to support that whether or not Jesus existed. But when the Bible is the only piece of evidence that you have, how can you? I mean, that's not good evidence. I mean, it's circular logic because the Bible claims that Jesus existed, and then you're going to use the Bible to say Jesus existed. I mean, you hide under the auspice of the Bible containing certain historical facts, like King Herod was an actual king, or Pontius Pilate actually existed. You use those things, but yet, it's so fucking hilarious to me that you guys would love to use the Bible and everything, but then fuck archaeology, fuck any kind of science, fuck radiocarbon dating, fuck all this shit, right? You believe in the Bible. The Bible that's been edited, re-edited, scrapped, edited again, and then, passed along, had some asses wiped on it, and then poof, you got the King James Version, and then it's continued to be edited and edited and edited and edited. You see where I'm getting with this? It's not a good document to use in order to say that Jesus actually existed. Even if you go back to the earliest one, the Pauline epistles and all that, Luke, Acts, whatever, they don't place Jesus on earth. Like especially Paul. Paul does not place Jesus on earth. So you're going to have to come up with better evidence than that. I appreciate you guys joining me today on this Did Jesus Exist? If you will, leave me your comments down below. Leave me your thoughts about these 5 pieces of evidence. And I would love to hear what you guys think of it. Because I was face palming the entire time. Like when I wasn't on screen, I was just like, fuck me. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a nice day, and I'll see you tomorrow.